Hello everyone, I'm Peter Wesselius, and this is Excel 101, an overview of the most important features in Microsoft Excel. In this video lesson, I'll be going through everything from loading a dataset into Excel, retabulating that data with pivot tables, using slicers to filter those pivot tables, creating graphs based on your retabulated data, and finally putting it all together into an interactive dashboard. So let's get started. What is Excel? Excel is a program for working with rows and columns of data, also known as tabular or tabulated data. Collectively, these rows and columns of data might be called a table or a data set. Each row represents a set of related information, and all the rows in a table will have the same structure. For example, in a data set that represents product purchases, each row would represent the purchase of a single type of item, and columns might represent things like price, quantity, purchase date, customer reference, and so on. Since I don't have real data on the sales of these products, I'm going to use a different data set for the rest of this demo. Airplane flights, a data set that is freely available from the Bureau of Transportation Statistics. So let's say we have a data set that represents about 1,000 airplane flights that took place in the month of January. And we only have nine columns of data. So we've got a flight date, an airline, an origin and destination state, departure and arrival time, departure and arrival delay, and total flight time. Using only these 9 data points, we can make some very powerful deductions using Excel. For example, we can see, which airline has the largest market share in a given state. We can see popular destinations for a given state, like if you wanted to answer the question, where do people in Tennessee like to fly to in January? We can also see average departure delay by destination and by airline, and average departure delay by carrier. These are just a few of the things that you can deduce by using only these 9 columns along with pivot tables, which is a feature I'll get into momentarily. So I'll start with market share by state. And here I have those 1,000 airplane flights, and I have the 9 columns A through I. So I'll start with market share by state, and to answer that question, I need my data tabulated with airlines in the first column, and the number of flights they made in the second column. Now I could make this new table by counting the number of rows with Delta Airlines as the carrier, and then do that for, US Airways, and then do that for, Pinnacle Airlines, and so on and so forth. Not only would that process be very error-prone, it would also be very tedious, and frankly something I just don't want to do. So thankfully, Excel can do that work for us. We just need to tell Excel to retabulate our data with different rows and columns. Excel calls this process pivoting, and to do this, you just go up to the Insert tab and click on Pivot Table. Excel will select the entire dataset by default, and that's exactly the behavior we want. So I'm going to hit OK, and we will see a new worksheet with a blank pivot table. So let's go back to our question real quick. Number of flights by airline. So whenever you have a question that follows that format, number of X by Z, or average X by Z, or something like that, like number of flights by airline, number of students by teacher, average test scores by student, whenever you have a question like that, you probably want Z to be either a row value or a field that you make a slicer for. Now I haven't got into slicers yet, so in this case we're just going to use this as a row value. So in this case, number of flights by airline, I want to make airline a row value, so I click the checkbox, and it shows up in row values automatically. Now, it might, under some circumstances, show up in any number of these sections. You just want to make sure it's in rows. Now, to see the number of flights for the airline, we can actually tell Excel to count any number of these properties. Since there's only one flight per row, whether Excel counts the departure time, the flight time, arrival time, whatever, it'll only increment it by 1, and that's what we want. So I'm just going to go ahead and count the arrival delay. So I'm going to click this and drag it into the values section, and Excel already chose a count. Now there's a few different things you can do with numeric properties. You can do a sum, a count, an average, a min, a max, etc. There's a few more. And Excel chose count for us, so I'm just going to leave that as is. And now we have a count of, or basically number of flights by airline. So I'm going to rename this to prevent confusion. And then we can chart this data by simply selecting, anywhere on the pivot table, going to the Insert tab, and inserting a chart. Now this pie chart has a few too many values to see comfortably, so I'm actually going to insert a slicer for this. And a slicer is a feature that was introduced in Excel 2010. It's still available in Excel 2013, which is what I'm using, and it's really simple. You basically select your pivot table, go to the Insert tab, click Slicer, and then choose which field you want to slice on. In our case, to get market share by carrier, I think we could choose either origin state or destination state, and we would still have a pretty good representation of market share, since you're not going to have a flight that flies to some city and then they're not going to fly back with an empty plane. So I think either one of these would work. I'll just do origin state. And this is a slicer, this thing we just added. And it's actually interactive, so we can click on one of these states and it will update the pivot table, and then since our chart is based on our pivot table, it will also update. And this lets us see basically market share by state. Now, even though we've added a slicer, I still think there's a few too many values to see comfortably, so I'm going to click this downward facing arrow next to row labels, and I'm going to go under value filters, and I'm going to choose top 10. And it lets you change the value of n that you want to see, and I'm going to make that 5. I'm going to click OK. And, now we've got, the top 5 in the list. Now, it looks like this is sorted just in A to Z by the airline name, which is not what we want. So I'm going to click that downward facing arrow again, and I'm going to go under more sort options. And I'm going to choose descending, Z to A, smallest or largest to smallest, and I'm going to make that number of flights. So now we have some more useful information. We actually have the top 5 most popular airlines in any given states. So we can choose one state like Arizona, and see that Southwest and US Airways are the biggest, and then we can hold down the control key on our keyboard and we can select multiple states, and we can see that between Arizona, California, Colorado, and Connecticut, Southwest Airlines is the most popular, with SkyWest as number 2. Now these buttons that show up on our chart, these are used for filtering the data that's being reported on. And since we've already added slicers, or a slicer, and we've sorted our data, these are sort of redundant, so I'm just going to go ahead and right-click on one of them and choose Hide All Field Buttons on Chart. And then I'm going to rename the chart Market Share by Airline, so that we know what it is. Then I'm going to click it, and I'm going to hold Control, click the slicer, right-click Cut, add a new worksheet. I'm going to call the new worksheet Dashboard. And I'm just going to paste those two things into that worksheet. And this is going to serve as a centralized place, for our slicers and our charts, which I think will make it easier to use. So let's see, what else did we want to do? So now that we've got market share by airline and also by state, I want to answer the question, where do people in Tennessee like to fly in January? So popular destinations by state. So I'm just going to go back to our data set, and I'm going to insert a pivot table. We actually don't want to include origin state because we're going to be using that as a filter, but what we do want to include is destination state. So this might make sense later. I'm going to add destination state as the row value, even though we're seeing popular destinations by origin state. In this case, we're going to want to make that by origin state slicer. So I'm going to choose the destination state because this is what we're going to want to be sorting, is destinations. And then I'm going to count one of these columns to see basically number of destination states. So we can see that in the whole data set, California was, had 111 flights going into California, 122 into Texas, and so on and so forth. Now to get this by state, and also the reason why we didn't want to put origin state in our row, is that we want to actually slice on that value. So we click the pivot chart anywhere, we go to the Insert tab, and we click the Slicer button. And now if we choose origin state, we can see that, if we choose Arizona, we can see that, Colorado is a popular destination, Texas looks like the number one, and this will let us see popular destinations by origin state. And I hope it makes sense why we didn't include origin state in a row, but it gets back to that formula, number of x by z or average x by z. And whenever you have that, z is going to be either a row value or it's going to be a field that you want to make a slicer for. And in this case it was a field we want to make a slicer for because we didn't actually want to include the origin state in our pivot table. I mean, we could. Here, I'll show you. I can click the origin state button, and we can see that Arizona had one flight within Arizona. Colorado had 4 flights from Arizona to Colorado, 5 flights from Arizona to Texas. So we can get the same information that way. But this is really going to mess up the graphing and the charting, and also I don't think it's quite as easy to use. So that's I hope I explained that well on why we didn't want to include the origin state. But we did include it as a slicer. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select the pivot table again, and I'm going to just choose more sort options and choose descending by the count of arrival time, which is really our number of flights. And then I'm going to hit that downward arrow again, and I'm going to go under value filters and choose top 5. So this is interesting because actually Excel will, if you've got a tie, Excel will not order those. So we can see that we're getting more than 5 values here, and that's because the the bottom 6 or whatever is actually tied. So Excel won't say the top 5. If number 4 has 2, number 5 has 2, and so does 6, 7, and 8. Then it's not, it'll include those in the results. So that's sort of how it handles ties. We can still chart it, and I still think it'll be easier to chart as well. So I'm going to click the pivot table again, go to the Insert tab, and choose a column graph. Then I'm going to remove those field buttons again, and going to test our slicer out. So Washington and Alaska are popular destinations for people flying out of Alaska. Texas and Colorado are popular in North Carolina, or Arizona, I'm sorry. Okay, cool. So I'm just going to rename this popular, or top destinations by state. I'm going to click my slicer, hold Control, click my chart, right-click Cut, go to the dashboard, and paste them. And now we've encountered a nice thing where we've actually got 2 slicers for origin state. And obviously that's not what we want, so I'm just going to delete one of them, and then right-click the slicer and go to Report Connections. This lets us choose which pivot tables we want to connect this slicer to. I'm going to hit OK, and now we actually have one slicer that is updating both of our charts. So let me zoom out a bit so it's easier to see. So that slicer is working on both of them. And one thing we can do to make the slicer easier to use is right-click and go under Size and Properties, and you should see basically a way to make it 2 columns. And that'll be different depending on your version of Excel, but it's pretty easy to figure out. I think this is a little easier to use. It's easier to find states. I mean, there's 50 of them, so 1 column is a little bit too long. And then if you want to see data for all the states, simply click this filter button, that clear filter, in the top right of the slicer, and that'll show you data for all the states. It'll basically, just the same as if you had selected all of them. But it's a shortcut, so. Now let's see, what else did we want to do? Average departure delay by destination and airline. So again, we're going to go back to our data set and insert a pivot table. And then we're going to want by airline, so we're going to put airline in the rows section. And then we're going to get the average departure delay. So Excel already put that in the values column, and it said it's doing sum. We want actually the average, so I'm going to click OK, and then I'm going to put these in descending order by average departure delay. And then I'm going to choose the top 5 by clicking that downward arrow under value filters, top 5. And then I'm going to make a chart out of this. So I'm going to go to insert with my pivot table clicked on, and I'm going to insert a column graph. Then I'm going to click on the pivot table again, and I'm going to insert a slicer. And I want to make a slicer for the airline. So I click OK, and now we can see average departure delay by airline. I'm going to remove those field buttons, select both of these, holding Control, right click, and paste them on the dashboard. Now we can right click the origin state slicer again, and we can connect it to the departure delay slicer. Now if we clear the airlines, so we select all the airlines, now we can see that in Arizona, SkyWest actually has a negative departure time, and American Airlines does too. Southwest, has a decent delay. These are departure delay. I'm sorry, not departure time. Southwest Airlines, is less than 5 minutes. So, there's no carriers in Arizona, at least in January, that had a really bad average. So I'm going to rename this average departure delay. And then, we can see that again, it's updating both of these. And wow, it looks like ACES Columbia had a 27.5 minute average departure delay. So that's no good. That's in Florida. And then back in my original data set, I could add additional pivot tables, sort and filter the pivot tables, add a slicer, chart the pivot table, and then copy and paste that onto the dashboard. And I don't want to become a broken record doing that for every single thing that I was originally going to add. So what I think I'll do is I'll just put the original data, this data table, I'll put this as a downloadable link on my site, and then I'll also put the end result on my site, and you guys can download it and take a look at it. But for now, I think, or at least I hope, my hope is that you, have gotten enough information to see the process, and at the same time, I don't want to bore you by, going through it over and over and over. So anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, just feel free to shoot me an email. You can find that on my site as well.